Well, um, welcome to Snowdrop Sunset. This is my second video blog. It was very strange watching me speak in the first one, and it's a bit of a stretch for me to go into this mode, but yeah, it's interesting just to experiment with the difference between getting things out via video and writing, and I've been doing some writing pieces which I hope you enjoy. This one is maybe a little bit more personal. I think everything I've been discussing is pretty personal, but I don't know, it's not appropriate to do a video for this subject, so I am. And I'm going to call this video Let's Talk About Death. There's been another lockdown started since the last video that I posted, and it just feels to me so relevant at the minute, and I really wanted to explore the topic from my space that I'm at now. So if you're interested, welcome along, and thank you for joining, and I hope you find something from the time you've spent listening to me. Okay. First up, I want to be kind of clear about a couple of things. Like, I talk about death in a casual way sometimes, and I'm gonna potentially explain why in the video, but I just want to kind of put it out there that I realize that death is a big deal. It's probably the biggest deal that we face as, humans, that we have to come to terms with our mortality, and that we can be aware of our mortality, and that we have to try and make sense of it in our minds. And grief is a very difficult emotion to live with. And death, loss, and grief, they can shape us as people. They're challenges, and I'm not trying to minimize the effects that death can have on the living in this video. I just want to put that out there. The other thing as well is that when I'm talking about death, anytime I talk about death, I try and hold in my heart people that I love and care about, so that it becomes more real and it's not based on ideology and my own personal attitude towards death. Because I think the attitude that you can have of the death of yourself and the death of others can be very different, and it helps me to have more compassion when I hold it in my heart. The memory of people that I love and care about who are living, and those that are dead, when I talk about death. So even when I'm talking about this subject and potentially saying things that could be triggering for people, or that people might judge as being harsh or anything like that, I don't know how it's going to be taken. I don't know if I mind how it's been taken, but I just want to put it out there that when I am talking about it, I do hold in my heart real people. So for me, death is an interesting subject because I've had a few brushes with death, and I currently have absolutely no fear of death. I'm not afraid to die. In fact, I will be ready to die at any moment. I have obviously things I would like to do in my life before I die, but if death was to meet me right now, fine. That's the way it is. There's nothing I can do to control it, and that's kind of my attitude to it. But because I've had experiences that I've had, that's kind of shaped how I have this relationship to death. So it does kind of put me in a position where I feel more comfortable talking about it, and where I can potentially make sense of the behaviours, attitudes, and energies around death that I've seen displayed in other people. I was named into a spiritualist church from birth. So I was brought up in a family, in a household where death was not considered as a negative, or death was not considered as the end. And I think partly because of that, and my own natural spiritual abilities, that I've been able to just grow up without a fear of death. Obviously, as I'll explain in a minute, I've had to also face death like head on, so to speak. I have died before. I've died and for whatever reason was brought back to life. And I have almost died before. I have been involved in a pretty serious accident and was saved again for whatever reason. So it's given me a bit of first-hand experience of dealing with my own mortality. And it just puts me in a slightly different position, I think, to people who've never had that experience with death, to be able to make sense of it a little bit. Also, in one way, I've been quite lucky. I've not actually, I've not lost, my mum is still alive, my nan is still alive, and I love them dearly. But I have watched an auntie that I loved very dearly die of cancer. I've watched friends of the family die of cancer. I've watched another aunt who I love very dearly slowly lose her mind and die of early onset Alzheimer's. Within our family, we've had deaths relating to suicide and deaths relating to addiction. So, although I've not experienced like a lot of losses in my life, the losses that I have experienced have been varied and have been with people close to me. So it gives me, again, obviously I have nowhere near the experience of somebody who's worked as a doctor or a nurse, or on the front lines of death or anything like that. I'm not trying to claim that I have, but I know how awful it can be to watch people suffer and then die, is what I'm trying to say. And for me, it's actually, I can separate that process. So I realise that the illness and the disease is actually separate to death. And that actually, the way I've seen it was for a lot of those people that I've just mentioned that I've lost, that death was actually a blessing in the end, and it ended their suffering, as opposed to death potentially being some sort of curse. And I miss these people, and I would love them, not to be dead, but they are, and I'm not, again, taking away anything from the loss of those souls and the effect it had on me. But I just wanted to give a little bit of context to my personal experience with death. For me, this COVID situation is like amplifying the attitudes and behaviours and potential unconscious, collective unconscious we have around death. Something I've noticed for years, long time. We never really discussed it much. I discuss it with friends, close friends, and some family members. But I just think that the COVID situation has like amplified it to such a massive level that I really want to talk about it. Nobody seems to be. So I'm gonna. For me, it's like our collective relationship to death. It's really scary. Like, the way people are afraid to talk about it, or afraid to, even what I'm doing now, like filtering my words around it because I don't want to offend or upset anyone or trigger anybody, or potentially give someone a spiritual awakening that might, really mess with their mind. But it's time. We're gonna have to. Like, we are literally being faced with death on a daily, minute by minute, if you watch the news basis, and it's time to fucking talk about it. If you watch me looking down, by the way, it's because I've got some notes. Okay, so death. Death is part of life. Death is part of our nature, and in fact, it's one of the few things that link every single one of us. We all know we're all going to experience death. But living in fear of death is not living at all. Living in fear of death is not being alive. Being alive and living are different things. And to me, being alive is about embracing life. And if you are in fear of your own death, then you can't be fully alive. You can't fully embrace and love something while you are afraid. It's just as simple as that. So I wanted to kind of bring that right back down to the ground that life, death, it is everything we know on the planet, it's everything we know in our existence, and it's all that we know is true. Like, some things live, then they experience their life, and then they die. And I can't imagine how crippling it must be to live in fear of death. I've tried to think about it. I've tried to think, what would it be like to be afraid of death? I've been afraid of a lot of other things, but not death. So I can't relate. If you really are genuinely terrified and afraid of death, I can't relate. I can try, because I understand what a deep fear is, like to have a deep fear, but I have deep fears about other things and not death. So I get the fear, and I hope that potentially the things that I have to say might help to ease some of your fear, if you have it, or at least open up the conversation around it. Okay, so I suppose what I want to say, the main part is, I feel like now we're like playing God. Like this COVID situation is amplifying that we've decided that some ways to die are good. Patriarchal lens again. This is good, this is bad. No. Some ways to die are good, some ways to die are honourable, some ways to die are valid, and other ways to die are bad, dishonourable, and not wanted. And it's like we've become a bit obsessed with it. Like choosing death, choosing our death. We're playing God. Like nobody gets to choose their death. Well, you do if you kill yourself, right? I mean, you do. But it seems to me as if we've decided that the only good way to die is to either die heroic. If you die saving somebody else, then that's a good way to die. Or you can die asleep in your bed after becoming very old and decrepit. And that's acceptable. You can get old, you can decay, and then you die asleep in your bed. Peacefully, I assume people would like. And yes, okay, that might seem appealing and it might be nice, but we can't choose that. We certainly can't demand it, which is what seems to be happening now. And it's like this threat of this virus is, it's so bizarre. It's like, like as if dying from a virus or some sort of quick grasping illness is not a good way to die. It's a bad way to die. But you know what? Sometimes a quick death is a blessing, and sometimes a long life is a curse. For me, if somebody I loved was in their 70s, 80s, 90s, and they were in a care home with Alzheimer's, it would be an absolute blessing from God if they were to contract COVID and die within 2 weeks. End of. It's a blessing, because I tell you what, watching someone slowly decay and rot their mind and die of Alzheimer's is horrific, and that suffering could be ended in 2 weeks. Yeah, that's a blessing, in my opinion. And it's almost as if we've become blind to seeing that, that somehow if people are just have their life extended, that if it's dragged out, that they're just kept alive longer, that's the blessing, that's what we all should strive for, and that's the answer to our happiness or our fear of death. Just stay alive longer, stay alive longer, stay alive longer. I hate to tell you that. Well, it might be how some people want to live, fine, but that's not a blessed life, just to be alive, or to be living. A blessed life is to be alive, And to be alive, you have to risk death. Like, you can't give meaning to your life and have meaning in your life if you're not prepared to risk being alive. Life is a risk. And choosing our death that way is dull. Really fucking dull. And I mean, I think what I find the most bizarre is that with the COVID situation, we've kind of got wrapped up in, we can't, it's not that we have to prevent all these deaths, we have to protect the vulnerable, them dying of a virus would not be a good way to die. Yet at the same time, we actually have so many standards of how that, people can't even choose how they die because it's still a taboo to kill yourself. Suicide is still considered bad or a sin or weakness. Or, choosing your own death, choosing I'm done, I'm going to kill myself, I'm gone, is still perceived as this negative thing. But trying to avoid death is not? It makes no sense to me. And then, the other side that, euthanasia is considered, well, it's illegal, right? And it's very taboo, and it's we shouldn't really, even some people are sort of a bad person for wanting to talk about euthanasia, but again, death in of itself is not a curse, it's not a bad thing, it's just a transition, it's something that has to happen to us, and it's we want to avoid it at all costs, but yet, we're not allowed to embrace it. We're not allowed to embrace death in our society. We're not allowed to say death is okay. We're not allowed to say death's going to happen and we don't get to choose it, and a risk of death is a perfectly acceptable way of living. It's going to happen to us, isn't it? It's going to happen. The other aspect of the COVID that's been amplified seems to be this confusion about what the role of government and doctors is. And I think people think that there's some sort of role there around preventing death. That government is supposed to prevent our deaths, or a doctor is supposed to prevent death. That's not how I understand it. I would suggest that their role would be to preserve life. Now, preserving life and preventing death are two different things completely. Preserving life is about cherishing life and making sure that life can carry on, and making sure that the quality of life that we have is something worth having, worth living. Preventing death is impossible. You can delay it, you can't prevent it. And then any government or any doctor who is fixed on that ideal of preventing death or preventing deaths is going to cause harm. They are going to cause harm because we can't prevent death. It's part of nature, it's part of the world, it's part of the reality that we live in, and it's part of being human, it's part of being alive. So preventing death is actually a pretty disastrous whole concept. Preserving life, I get that. Yeah, we should preserve life in all its forms and in all of the wonderful aspects of life, and that means our physical health, our mental health, our emotional, all of it. Just trying to force people to stay alive, living in boxes and never connecting or seeing anybody, that's not living. It's not living. And it might be delaying death, but certainly not preserving life. So this is just a little short video. I might do some writing about death and explain some of the experiences I have had personally with death. That might be cool. But I just think we should need to start having conversations about it. Like when COVID first started, that's one of the first things I had to do was, sit down and speak to my nan and tell her how much I loved her and talk to her about her mortality, and we had to discuss the risks of being in contact and her potentially catching a virus and what that might mean. And having that conversation brought us closer and gave us clarity in in our relationship. And that's not anything that the government or any doctor or nurse should be getting involved with. That's conversations between individuals or within families that needs to be kept that way. But we also need to have public conversations around death and the acceptability of death. Death is acceptable. It's acceptable to die. It's acceptable to die anyway. There are no ways to die that are unacceptable unless we make it so, you know. And just opening out the fact that dying of a virus is an acceptable way to die. Like nature is, well, okay, that's a whole other subject. We'll assume that this virus is a natural one. Might well not be, right? But we'll assume this virus is a natural one. And in that case, then nature thinks we really need to have a virus to kill some people so that the earth can sustain or humanity can sustain. We can't understand all the reasons around life or death. We can't understand that. It's not our place to understand it as humans. And there might well be a very, very good reason why a lot of us need to face either the fear of the threat of a virus or actually go through the physical trauma of experiencing a virus or dying of a virus. There may be a very good reason for that. We don't know. It's not our place as humans to be questioning death and to be trying to contain death into spaces that we approve of, in times, spaces, and ways we approve of. I think that's all I'd like to say on the matter in this video. Hope you enjoyed it. And enjoy life. Be alive. Don't die. Well, you might die. You're gonna die. But it's fine. Just live. Live before you die. I honestly, genuinely think that it is what we do with our lives that give our life meaning. That we have no meaning until we do something with our life, make a connection, understand ourselves, whatever it is, to connect with life that brings meaning to it, is what makes us alive. And that, I feel, is what we should be preserving. We should be preserving the aliveness of life and not focused on preventing death.